Our session for noon is about nationhood, everyday life, and ecstatic moments. And the reason I added ecstatic moments is because Michael's here, which I can see now. Hi, Michael. He's going to talk more about the ecstatic moments, and unfortunately, he's also in COVID situation, so he's also going to talk to the Zoom today. We're our second COVID person today. But it worked fine in the morning. I just want to remind everybody to remember your time, like around 15 minutes for the talk, and then you need more time. Okay, sorry. And then have more time for the discussion. So without further ado, I want to present our first speaker, Jon Fox, sociology at the University of Bristol. Jon Fox is a sociologist with interest in everyday nationalism, migration, integration, and racism. In all these areas, he's interested in the everyday practices that sustain and sometimes clash with the institutional and political versions of these projects. Fox is assistant director at the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Citizenship.
Great, thank you, Danny, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to sit down because if you're like me after lunch, it's nap time. So if I fall asleep, Danny, please wake me up, okay? Yeah, so you keep me quiet, yeah. So I'm going to talk about something that I didn't realize how similar it was going to be to everyone else's talk, and how much worse it is than the talk so far. So there's a lot to learn from what Danny, Dan, and Sinisha have already talked about. And the questions I've been asking them, you'll see, are really questions for myself that I don't really have answers for. So anyhow, first of all, I changed the name, the content, everything. I told Danny there was a slight title change, but it's really the whole talk. So it's from local solidarity to national belonging to a global pandemic. And this is really more about this kind of connection between local solidarities experienced in the pandemic around clapping rituals, and then how that kind of scales up to a question of national belonging. So that's what I'm trying to find. It's that same sort of thing that we've been talking about already. And I have my own kind of partial answer to it. Yeah, so we think. Right. So it's kind of stuff that Danny's worked on. Marco Antonstick has also worked on this kind of relationship between the national and the local, and how the national is experienced through the local. And so this is my kind of contribution to this. So, and it's about COVID and nationalism, which is something that I presented at a workshop that Sinisha organized in March. And that got me thinking about COVID and nationalism. And then I started reading up on it. So it turns out I was probably the only one not thinking about COVID and nationalism, because there's lots of stuff, an amazing amount of stuff that's been published on it. And some really good stuff too, some really interesting stuff, some of which I'm going to draw on today. So I'm a kind of Johnny-come-lately to this. But it's something that's been going on for a while now. You get stuff on vaccine nationalism, which some of you may have heard of, or the kind of idea that the global north is hoarding vaccines at the expense of the global south, or at least developing countries. There's a particularly British version of COVID nationalism, which is the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is really interesting to watch. So I'm not from the United Kingdom, I'm from the United States. I've lived there 19 years. COVID made me British in many different ways, but one thing that I didn't feel British about was the AstraZeneca thing, and the extent to which people really felt a strong attachment to this, which was really captured when other countries started looking at, or started saying that they had doubts about the AstraZeneca vaccine, and there's a strong national offense taken to this just because of a few lethal side effects of the vaccine. But so there's a real kind of, real strong kind of national sentiment behind this. One that I haven't seen anyone kind of come to terms with yet. So there was an article in the BBC where they were very critical of other countries for not accepting the vaccine from the United Kingdom, and they blamed other countries for their nationalism that was the cause behind this. Anyhow, so just an example of some of the ways COVID and nationalism go together. They go together discursively, so we have all these kinds of martial metaphors, of warlike footing, war footing, all these kinds of things. In fact, there's someone here whom I don't know, forgot this person, Yuval Benjamin, who's done some work on nationalist discourse around COVID, and so I just picked out one good Boris Johnson quote there you have to look, but obviously things that go together quite well. He's a kind of frame analytical approach to exploring discourse in different contexts, nationalist discourse. And then there's also this kind of caring nationalism thing, which is an expression Helen Wood and Skeggs used. We take a critical approach to this, of course, but this is a kind of performance nationalism that manifests in different COVID rituals that celebrate and honor the institutions of public health. And in the UK, we had this kind of clap for our carers version. Did you do something similar in Israel? Yeah. Well, we were first. We went first. Actually, some interesting research on this.
That's nationalism.
But what's interesting is a lack of awareness. I mean, so there's I'll mention some research that's been done into this. They found examples of clapping ceremonies in 101 different countries, starting in Wuhan province actually, and then moving next to kind of Italy, but not necessarily from Wuhan. It might have just been, kind of spontaneous in that. But then obviously there is a kind of knock-on effect where it kind of is picked up in different countries. Anyhow, it's this clapping nationalism thing that this is the question that interests me the most. Sorry, the caring nationalism, clapping nationalism too, that I want to explore a little bit more, both empirically and conceptually, in my talk today. And again, as I said, I'm interested in the local and national solidarities, belongings that these rituals enact and reproduce. So here's what I want to do. The outline for the talk is start locally with the local experiences of solidarity. So this is the first bit is what the data show. Okay, so I have some data, not much, I'll go through it very quickly. It's from a different study that has nothing to do with COVID, nothing to do with nationalism, but it was conducted during a time of COVID, and so there's some COVID content there that I'll share with you. But this is how the experiences of clapping are unambiguously local, very local, very kind of micro, not even neighborhood, but my street, people I can see, the concrete communities that you were talking about, Danny, at the beginning. And so I'm going to look at this local experience, and then I'm going to try to kind of make a conceptual link to the national imaginaries of belonging that follow from them. So trying to draw on some of Sinisha's work, but also kind of stuff that Danny does, but also this kind of interaction ritual chain, right? The Randall Collins bit, which I think helps kind of think about scaling up a little bit. So the data aren't there, but the theory is, and so it's kind of trying to explore how can we think of this, should we think of this as also engendering kind of national solidarities at the same time. So I'll try to make a case, but very preliminary, but that's what it is. Let me start though with the local experiences, and I'll share just a few things from my project, which is a project on integration, everyday integration, because everything I work on starts with everyday. This one's on integration, kind of bottom-up approach to integration in Bristol. It wasn't about, so the data collection strategies weren't asking questions about nationalism, and certainly they weren't asking questions about integration or anything like that, about everyday life and everyday practices that we thought might contribute to experiences of integration. So, because this project was done during the period of COVID, we did collect some data around this time. We did some interviews with people in different neighborhoods. That's what I'm going to share with you. And we also did a questionnaire. So anyone who does quantitative research, please don't ask questions. This was done, in a very quick and dirty way to kind of generate some data when we were in panic mode at the beginning of COVID. So we have some interesting data. We have a decent sample size, but it was done in a very kind of quick and dirty way, as I said. Anyhow, so the data are not about COVID, they're not about nationalism, but some stuff about COVID comes up. And I just want to share a few things, excerpts from our interview data that show, I'm not even going to read through these, you can look at them if you'd like. Basically, the story they tell is that the experience of the clapping, these are people talking about going out on Thursday evenings at 8 o'clock to clap, and they talk about it in very, very local ways, very specific ways, very concrete ways, seeing their neighbors, reconnecting with their neighbors, meeting new neighbors, this kind of thing. So yeah, so just, it's local, right? So there's nothing national here, there's no national stuff in any of the data, no one talks about this in national terms, or really anything beyond the immediate, right? The immediate and the concrete. It's standing out in front of your house, looking to your left, looking to your right, that's the community that's being reproduced in that kind of clapping experience. So in these and other cases, we're seeing this very localized experience of clapping. So not an imagined community, but the one that we can see as we look down both directions on our street. So we can also see this in a slightly different way in how neighborhood bonds were strengthened in our survey results. So there's a fair amount of data here, but it's really this bit right here, which just shows the strengthening of neighborhood attachments relative to other forms of attachment during the pandemic. So you see an increase in neighborhood attachments vis-a-vis other kinds of attachments, which, again, this isn't specific to clapping, but it does show that neighborhood attachments are on an increase. On the one on the right, I don't really need to include, but it just shows that the decrease is least significant amongst neighborhoods. So strengthening neighborhood attachments, there's some interesting differences in there, but that's not the focus of this talk, but you can ask questions about that and we'll come back to that. And then this is, this one here, it says in the caption, this one here is by ethnic group, immigration status, and length of time. And then the second one shows similar findings, but it's by take-home pay and index of multiple deprivation. On my place here. Yeah, so again, what we see here, this is not about clapping per se, but about attachments to neighborhood, but combined with the qualitative data on the clapping, what we see here is the kind of reproduction of local experiences of community, which, again, everyone knows about, nothing problematic there. So far, no nation. The question is, how can we bring the nation or national forms of belonging into this equation? And so I want to consider whether these local attachments, in this case, the case of NHS clapping, might also manifest as national attachments, but also in the larger context of COVID. So clapping for carers was in fact a national ritual insofar as it was the national sum of multiple local parts. It wasn't national in a kind of collective sense, but in this kind of sum of these local parts. But experientially, we weren't clapping to express support for the nation. We did this to express support for the NHS, for care workers, for key workers, people like this.
And also it was done all over the world. Oh, in many places.
It was in many different parts of the world. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But of course, different. I mean, yeah. So different versions of it in different parts of the world. So how then, if at all, does clapping as part of a national ritual strengthen national bonds? And I've got two connected answers to that I want to try to explain. I sort of foregrounded in the introduction. First, I want to kind of think in this bottom-up way in terms of ritual practices and how ritual practices give us, through Randall Collins' work on interaction ritual chains, give us a kind of mechanism for scaling things up from the local to the national. And then I want to come at it from the top down, the macro, as Sunesh was talking about in his talk, so kind of looking at how the organizational capacity of the state, which was exercised by the pandemic, gives us a way of experiencing rituals and many things to do with COVID in national terms, although that experience is not a kind of, 4 minutes, right? Okay, yeah, good. I can do that. All right, so the first bit is we start by seeing this clapping for what it is, which is, I think, a ritual practice, and rituals are, of course, important because they make visible the bonds of the community, and at the same time give us an opportunity to renew those bonds, and they take us out of our kind of atomistic, mundane lives and remind us that we're part of something bigger. This can be important, particularly important and effective in times of crisis. So, Michael Skay's work on national belonging and ontological security by Giddens tells us that the nation can give us a kind of grounding, particularly when we lack that, when we have ontological insecurity. And in fact, Paul Good and some other colleagues have worked on this in one of the early publications on COVID and nationalism, cited Bart Bonakowski's, he was supposed to be here, Bart Bonakowski's work on nationalism in settled times, and Paul was talking about this is kind of nationalism in unsettled times. So again, the rituals are important to kind of reconnect us to communities in times of crisis. But that doesn't tell us what kind of community, right? We can reconnect to all sorts of different communities. So far that we know that the experience of it, or rather the discursive representation of the experience of it, is unambiguously local. We also know that the background of this in the UK, it begins in London, where this woman named Anne Laplace, this is not research I did, this is a couple of, I'll cite them just a moment, yeah, they're right here. She got it started. She nipped the idea from Dutch friends, so she's Dutch, and so she found out that something like this was going on in the Netherlands, and she started it in the UK, and then it just spread. And this is where this work of interaction ritual chains comes in, not directly via Randall Collins, but by a really interesting article by someone named Joseph Guttner and Riegel. So Joseph Guttner is the surname, I don't have their first names here. One in Switzerland, Riegel is in Switzerland, Joseph Guttner is in California. And they use this idea of interactional ritual chains to talk about how in a remarkably short amount of time, this clapping kind of takes off and spreads, like a virus, excuse the pun, to other cities, other countries, and ultimately across the globe. Now, I'm not going to go global with my analysis. In fact, I'm going to argue that the chains I'm talking about get nationally stuck. But the idea of interactional ritual chains provides a really useful mechanism, I think, for understanding how rituals can do shift scales. So the first point then, following Riegel and Joseph Guttner, is that Collins' interaction ritual chains give us this mechanism for thinking about this shift in scale. So it helps us just kind of, gives us a kind of conceptual apparatus for moving from the local to a different scale. In this case, I'm interested in the local to the national. The new national canvas for the rituals, however, doesn't explain how that makes us national, or how it makes us experience these things in national terms. So the next thing I want to do is consider some of the emblems that were on display at this, because of course emblems tell us, they remind us of our attachments, and this goes back to Durkheim, of course, but others as well since then. So what do we see on display at the rituals in England? We see flags, but I should point out not too many of them, right? So this is pretty exceptional to find flags. More often it's the kind of banners here, it's the blue colors of the banners, it's the NHS, it's the NHS symbolic repertoire, and there was one, but it turns out there is. You find other sort of homemade things like this, I'm not sure if that's homemade or not, but a lot of things like this are just kind of out on the streets, just reminding us that, so the blue, it's not there's nothing, of course, intrinsically national about all of this, but it's the repetition of these sorts of symbols, and these are very prevalent. And then rainbows were a big part of it as well. Usually just on one side of an A4 put into the window, but since we're standing outside our front doors, they hem in the experience of the event. So these are the kind of symbols that were present. But there's nothing, as I said, intrinsically national about these symbols, and I think most of them kind of went unseen or unregistered in the sense that we're not looking at them and seeing, oh, I feel part of a nation. It's not creating that kind of experiential awareness of the nation, but I do think that they're important in a more kind of Michael Billig-inspired way, banal nationalism-inspired way, that they give us the kind of taken for granted landscape that is part of this ritual practice. They're the kind of unseen symbols that are the functional equivalent of Michael Billig's limp flags, camouflaged almost by their banality. I mean, things like the NHS and stuff. There's nothing nationalist about any of this, so that we don't think of them that way. But yet, their repetition in these kinds of rituals is contributing to that experience. So the experience of the experience though of the rituals was local. That's what the data show, right? The community we witnessed was our neighbors out there on the street clapping with us. That was the visible, tangible community made up of real people, many of whom we knew, others whom we could have known. Yet the emblems on display, which we barely notice, subtly widen those imaginaries to a national canvas. And so that wasn't in how we experienced the events, but in the national belonging that was reproduced through the participation in them. And this is where I want to come in and end with Sinisha's bit. I'll be quick here. These national imaginaries were made possible because of the organizational capacity of the state, and how that provides the spatial and institutional boundaries of these imaginaries, which is again coming from Sinisha. And this is because COVID was exceptional in how it exercised the state, or particularly the public health institutions, to respond to the multiple challenges of the pandemic. Now, we had nowhere to turn in the COVID pandemic except to states, so we have these supranational organizations of governance, which were fairly feeble. They're never really in the running as kind of COVID first responders, where they were more of a kind of sideshow to the main event of COVID responses that were happening in individual nation states. So COVID was important because it set in motion the machinery of the state to channel its institutions and resources into this great battle against COVID. Nothing, again, national about this intrinsically, about states responding to COVID, but as we know, states are also, of course, in the business of making nations, and the institutions of states don't simply churn out policies and practices, but also discourses and ideologies that lend popular legitimacy to those policies and practices. Often they do this through things like educational and other cultural institutions. Those are the kind of institutions we like to study as nationalism. But nation making can also be an artifact of other things that states do, like fighting a pandemic. So this time it was the National Health Service, the Department of Health and Social Care, and a wide range of enforcement agencies that were bringing the institutions of the state home to us with rules and regulations that governed our everyday lives. And it wasn't just mask mandates and booster jobs, lockdowns and social distancing. It was the shared experience of mask mandates, booster jobs, lockdowns and social distancing. So we have nationally shared experiences of COVID, which is why our NHS rituals were different than yours. Not uniform experiences on a national level, but at least shared experiences. So the argument here is that the state's response to COVID and the penetration of society via the institutions, mainly of the NHS, that make the nation an imagined but unspoken reality in the rituals we perform. So it's not how people discursively represent their experiences of it, but it's more like a reproduction of a kind of banal nationalism. COVID required a national response, and these national responses called upon and simultaneously reinforced nationalism. So, that's that. Yeah, okay. Anyhow, just the conclusion, clapping for the NHS engendered this tangible experience of local solidarities. This is what my data show. This is how people represent their experiences of belonging. But at the same time, the participation in the ritual practice of clapping, a kind of national genuflection, reproduces a more banalized version of nationally imagined community of belonging. One we did not articulate in recounting our experiences of clapping because, in a sense, we didn't have to. The national backdrop for this clapping, symbolized by the emblems on display, operated mindlessly rather than mindfully, stealthily reconstituting the world of nation and our affective attachments to them without requiring or even really allowing a more self-conscious ratification of that. So that's my theory, or my idea about how a local phenomenon can also become simultaneously national. That's it. Did I go over?
Very interesting, I think. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. So first, we'll take a few and then talk and then another few. So Thomas, Julia, and Sinisha, and then we go on. Please.
Thank you very much. I would challenge the point that you say it's more this kind of local experience of solidarity.
Yeah.
I would say it's initially national because of the national health reference. Say it's always for us, and even if it's imported from a Dutch person, that we cheer for our people. Why don't we do it in the land for our people? They could have done so, as in the rainbow picture, for our GPs in our city. Or for our key workers, and our very localized, because ours, is also a flexible thing, but as it's the explicit reference to national health, I would bet this is for everybody clear that it's us, the UK people.
Yeah, okay. Can I respond to this now, or should I? Good. Good. All right. So well, I mean, so I accept that, except it's not what the people are saying when they recount this. So I think it goes to the kind of, I mean, one of the things that I was going to ask Sinisha about too, and we could talk about anyone's data in this respect, is the assumed connection between representations of experience and the actual experiences. So the actual experience may be very well what you're talking about. They're out there, we're thinking NHS, our people and so on. But when we recount it, and we talk particularly about the experiences of community, we talk about our neighbors, we talk about those sorts of things that we're not talking about the national, we're not talking about even the NHS or the key workers or anything related to that. We're talking about the experiences of how it brought us together as a community. And that community is not a national one, but a very, very local one. So I can't climb into people's heads. I was there. I mean, my experience was awkward, so that was not nationally awkward, not locally awkward, but just, oh shit, this is strange. So that was kind of my experience of it. But I can't crawl into other people's experiences of it. But it may very well be that. And that's, in a sense, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say it was that, but I'm trying to get there by different means, not through people's discursive representations of it, or through what the data show, but through making this kind of conceptual link, because the container for this, and I'm not supposed to talk about containers, but the non-watertight container for this is a national one. So and the symbols, the emblems, they're all saying NHS, all this kind of stuff. It's just that how people talk about it, they use it as a way to reproduce local attachments as opposed to national ones.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yes.
I was wondering, when you talk about a collective belonging, a national, collective experience, national experience, collective belonging, how do you distinguish between an actual collective experience and just something that is collectively coordinated or orchestrated? You see what I mean? So a bunch of people doing something at the same time in a coordinated manner, and actually a collective experience of feeling part of the collective. Do you see where I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So which one do you mean here, and whether you can address this distinction somehow?
Do you want?
My question is connected with what you're saying in a sense. I mean, I very much like how you are framing this, because I think there is the Durkheimian element of a social interaction, there is a Weberian element of the state, the organization, they're very much present. But and this is what Julia is saying in a sense, what's interesting, when we think of the Durkheimian thing, we think about collective effervescence, we think about something intense, something really deeply emotional, which this was not in a way. This was much more habitual, much more of stuff that you do anyway. And the question is how much of it is engineered, because states where they wanted this to happen, and that was promoted on TV. Let's go and everybody clap. For our NHA workers, we will not pay them more. We'll just clap them. So that's obviously linked also in part with, whether we trust this state. People didn't like Johnson, and maybe in some parts of the world these things work better than in others. And we do have a kind of interesting, more kind of spontaneous things happening in Spain and Portugal, singing in balconies and things like that, which are very part of that. Italy. So it is an interesting thing, how deeply Durkheimian this is, or is it just a kind of more habitual rather than, I don't see kind of the Collins, the bubbles, time bubbles that, which are rockets. They're emotional, they're intense, they're short, but they're very much Durkheimian qualitative effervescence. And that doesn't seem to me this was the case. Maybe it would be in some other things. So I'm thinking this is more in line what you usually do anyway, kind of everyday stuff.
That's not the same as Julia's question.
Yeah.
I knew you Julia, can you repeat yours, please, just very quickly?
No, seriously, is it just something that is coordinated, or is it really a deep collective thing? It's like,
I don't think it's a deep collective thing. I think it's, I remember that. I will come back to your question, Sinisha, but I don't think it's a deep collective thing. I think it's a non-experiential version of it. So that's why I use this term banal nationalism, which of course is Michael Biller's work. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I do.
Okay. So it's not this kind of experience or awareness of it. It's because it's hemmed in by the organization, by the institutions of the state. Not so much in the way you're talking.
But what makes it collective in this? So collective can be two things. Collective that you and me are going to the bathroom every morning separately. We're doing it because that's what we do. Is make it a shared experience. That's what I mean. So collective in what way?
Okay. First of all, I don't think I said collective, so I'll just distance myself from that. Does it say it there?
Collective belonging, and you also said it.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. But let's not split here. I certainly talk about shared. I talk about shared awareness in the rituals on community level, and I am trying to say something about the scale of it. But if I did say something about collective or shared, I'm not trying to say it's a experience of collective or shared belonging. It's the creation of a kind of shared belonging through the machinery of the state that is providing, that is telling us in some unselfconscious way that this is a national ritual. So it's the idea that the things that we're doing, we're focused on our neighborhoods. We may have a connection, we may be thinking about the NHS or something, but we're not thinking about nationalism per se. We're not thinking about this is a national thing.
What's the difference?
What's that?
What's the difference between, I don't understand your argument here. There is something, initiated or sponsored or fostered by the state. There is an experience here, collective experience. Why you are insisting that it is not nationalism? What's the difference?
Because of the language people use to describe their experiences of it, which are very community focused, very localized in terms of how they experience it. So I am saying it's nationalism, but not in the discursive representations of it. The discursive representations of it are very local, but due to the machinery of the state, it reproduces this kind of banal national belonging. So this idea that we are part of the same nation as opposed to a part of a different nation, which is why we're focused on our rituals and not someone else's rituals. What's happening in other countries, even though there's a similarity, is not the thing that concerns us.
Shouldn't nationalism
I'm afraid we're running out of time. Can you answer please this question and then we
It's part of that.
time for only one last question.
Aber
Okay,
ze
so,
loopt naar
do you want to answer
speak.
Felix's question?
We should discuss that.
Yeah, no, sorry,
What's the
Michael's
mistake you're
laughing
telling
over
me?
here. You can't see him, but he's had his hand up. For like
I
an
still
hour.
good to tell me.
Gal had his hand up
Don't
first.
start mistake.
I would like to, I think part of the debate is perhaps a methodological debate, because in a sense, you're talking on a process that you study how people interpret their experience at the local level. And Thomas was pointing that there is a possibility, because you use the slogan of the NIH, there was a process from a psychological perspective, of comparison, because people were sitting at home, people were watching TV, people saw the reaction in Italy. We said, wow, we're not in Italy. We're in a better position than Italy. We're better positioned than the EU that we left after the Brexit, and our health institutions are better than the EU. We don't need supplies from China. And I wonder if you had asked about people, you have these interviews, and you also ask them, did you watch news? Did you aware of the role of the NNS vis-a-vis other problems? If this different methodological approach might be bridge between his argument and what I'm telling about the national aspect, because when you say it's a banalized national imaginary, perhaps you are using the concept of banal as something that is not banal, because in this situation of the COVID, which was extreme condition, it's not a balanced situation. So maybe the problem is methodological one.
Well, it could be, and as I said, this wasn't designed to do that. I mean, I'm skeptical of the kind of the more. So I think if you ask questions about, did you feel a national attachment, you'd probably get answers that would say yes. But I think that also introduces a bias into the question where, if you ask questions about, did you experience a local attachment, the answer would be yes as well. So people tend to kind of respond with the categories that you use in the questions. But you could do that, and the banal version it's not a mutually exclusive category. You can have banalized versions of the nation, but you can also, and surely there are people who did experience this in national terms. We just didn't come across them in our data. But I don't know. I'm confused. Should I answer Sanisha's question? Or should I just stop?
Answer a comment, not a question. A
Yeah.
comment. Wait a minute, Sinisa, can you just answer the
Yeah.
question?
I seem to cause a lot of upset here.
No, it's a very important discussion.
Yeah.
I wanted to.
Yeah. Sinisha, it's interesting that you focus on kind of Boris Johnson and what the state was saying. I think this is the state light, LITE, that in the sense that that this didn't start with the government. It wasn't. I mean, it was picked up by them and stuff. And I think the news media play an important role, and BBC, an institution of the state, and those play important roles. But I think I think it's more, the organization. It's just the penetration of the state into society by the institutions of the NHS, public health, all this kind of stuff, in unprecedented ways. And I mean, everyone says unprecedented when they're talking about COVID, but I think in terms of these institutions impacting our daily lives and giving us a shared awareness that's taking place within our country as opposed to other countries. And things that Gal was talking about, you always have this, the reference point is the other country, right? And you have these COVID trackers that show you, how we're doing compared to them and all this kind of stuff. So the containers, the categories that we're working with are very much national categories, not in the explicit way, but in the implicit way. And so and then if I could do a longer version of this talk, I would give a much more fuller version of the kind of banalized version. Actually, some of the things that I was doing in the workshop that you organized. But I'm not doing that here. But I think that's all present. It's just not when people talk about their solidarities. And there's a lot of stuff out there on the kind of local solidarities that were reproduced by this. The WhatsApp groups, the chat groups, the kind of reconnecting with your neighbors, helping, supporting. Danny's getting impatient. So we have one organization.
I want to continue this discussion which we had. You said, John, that there's nothing national about this. I'm paraphrasing, of course. There's nothing national about the centrality of the nation state in combating COVID. I guess you meant that there is no British way or Dutch way or Israeli way or, I don't know, Indian way to combat. People are combating COVID. It's a human situation for all humans. And there is nothing intrinsically national in the.
There could be national styles in combating.
Yes, but it's negligible, and that's not what I'm talking about. So, but the very fact that during the combating COVID, we are all resorting to nation state, even within the EU. And nation state selfishness, nation state that are taking care for their own citizens, reveals something else which belongs to nationalism, not the identity, the collective identity of the British and the Dutch, but the very fact that we are organized in in republics, in nation states which are particular. Ours, our people. We are caring for our people. This is a national. So there is. You said nothing. I think there is a lot of nationalism here in this situation, and people in the local experiences are also expressing their Britishness. I agree with you. The NHS, yeah.
National
Health Service.
It's not okay. We have a health service which is with other names, but it is a British institution.
Yeah.
The end is what they
not
are
expressed
supposed
that
to
way.
do.
Listen, we got that. I get the last word.
No, I would just stress, Abi said it the content wise, but Gal made it really as a methodological point.
I'm not sure it's methodological.
If you ask me to name the top 10 symbols, national symbols of Britain, I put NHS up there.
Yeah, of course.
If you ask me for four
No, wait.
They put it in the inaugurating ceremony of the Games in London.
Michael's here. Michael's going to use his talk to kind of respond to my talk. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Usually it's a short
I
Yeah.
missed your point.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, but I thought I was setting the bar too high by saying that this is national. You're all pushing me into this kind of, saying, no, it is very national.
Yeah.
I'm someone who's interested in the evidence of that, and I don't see the evidence of that in the way people talk about this. So I'm looking for a conceptual link.
So after that, methodological point, so as long as you talk in the frame, say, focus on Great Britain, you will never hear the name Great Britain, because it's just the frame of reference.
Because it's banal. Because it's banal. Exactly.
Right, that's it.
That's because they didn't have to.
Then, of course,
Yeah.
people name all the actors
Okay.
there.
I don't know, you sound
I'm not sure we will have an argument, but if we do have an argument, we can continue it later on.
We have to.
Or you can.
Wait, was it national or not?